Hey, Dawn, welcome to Let's Talk Quality. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Hamish. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Dawn, if you could give the listeners and the viewers just a very quick, high level who you are right now, and then we'll work back from there, that'd be great.
Great, great. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on your show. I've been listening and hearing other interesting talks that you've had prior. I am grateful
Yeah.
to be here. Presently, and for about a year now, I've been working on my own, running Lundin Consulting Group, supporting some rescue work for a firm called the Quanta Group, about 50% of my time there. I've been doing some fractional head quality work, one for a technology company supporting the psychedelic space, as well as another company that is in stealth mode presently, so building up their quality management system. And in between that time, just staying connected with a lot of my quality professionals and the network that I'm in, attending conferences and staying up to speed on the ever-changing regulations.
So you've had an interesting sort of career and career trajectory and sort of it's not necessarily a typical path that a lot of quality leaders follow in terms of starting in big pharma and going to academia and so forth. So let's go back to the beginning, right back to the beginning. I suppose what first drew you into science, and then how did you land in quality?
Well, very, very early on, one of the first opportunities I had was an internship at the time, SmithKline Beecham, which is now GlaxoSmithKline. And while I was in college, I worked there for 2 summers. The first one being a rotation through the Laboratory Animal Resources Division under Bob Jackson, which gave me an opportunity to work both in the toxicology areas and the chemistry and research development areas, and just kind of get a sample of what the work was that was involved in research in the toxicology space, and early clinical development, if you will. And then I was invited back a second summer, and I did a research project with another student that they brought in from Harvard. And so had great experiences there and got to see a lot and learn how Big Pharma was running at the time. And then upon graduation, I had an opportunity to continue on in that space with SmithKline. However, I was invited to do a research project at the Philadelphia Zoo. And since my heart was with research, I thought, well, I'd like to try research in a different environment. And so I proceeded and did a research project, which has ended up being more of a human research project in the end. It was supposed to be nutrition in theory, but in the end, it ended up being more about how the commissary was interacting with the different houses of where animals were being cared for. And once that concluded, I realized that I did want to get back into more of a pharmaceutical research environment. And so that's when I segued back into and worked for Xenobiotic Labs, again, in the toxicology space, writing protocols, doing the dosing, doing the necropsy, analyzing the samples, and writing the full study reports. It was kind of research soup to nuts in that role, which then led me to a role at Merck. And then I spent the 20 years at Merck continuing in research and evolving in my career there.
So you spent 20 years at Merck, and you worked your way up from sort of an auditor, I think was your first role, up through to director. I suppose what my initial question would be, what kept you there for that time, and what kept you growing, and especially at the points when you may have felt it could have been an easy time to plateau in your career. It's a long time, but how did that all pan out?
I would say the evolution of my career at Merck, well, first of all, it was an amazing time there. I still, to this day, talk to many of my contacts and colleagues that I've had the opportunity to work with, including leaders. Some of them retired at this point. I think the thing that kept me the most was Merck was very good at employee development and constantly giving those opportunities for learnings. And so I was one of those that would always take an opportunity when it became available. And so while I evolved across all of the good practice spaces, right? I started out as a bench chemist and again in that tox space. Animal formulation division was bought out. I moved into clinical packaging, more of that GMP regulated space, and learned a lot of QCing and quality control checks, which is really how I evolved into the quality roles that I continued on in my career there. And then moved into the GCP auditing, which afforded me travel to all of our sites all over the world, and then being invited to do and build out our pharmacovigilance when the GVPs came into play in 2012, build out our pharmacovigilance auditing program. It was a succession of opportunities that kept me fully engaged and things that I was afforded to be a part of. There was always opportunity, whether it was through learnings, leadership courses, or through the next development as regulations changed and things became available. Up to the point where when I left, I was heading the QMS, our issues management program, and helped co-author the very first quality manual for the research division. No small feat. Took us about 2 years to kind of get that completely finalized, which involved working with our manufacturing division and our human health divisions to ensure that we had aligned our quality manual with global quality initiatives for the entire organization.
Yeah. So take us back to the start of your career with Merck. When was that? Where were you? What did it feel like?
So this would have been segueing from Xenobotic Labs, so coming off of being like running my own studies from start to finish and writing the protocols, to then working as a bench chemist in that animal formulation group under Paul Thwaites at the time. Let's see, that would have been right as Roy Vagelos had left and Gil Martin took over. So we're going way, way back in time here. I do think that moving into that role as the bench chemist, being back in Big Pharma, I was, remembering my days at SmithKline Beecham. I think I had wanted to just kind of get back into Big Pharma and be able to leverage some of the skills and the things that I had learned up to that point in my career. And so it was an exciting time to be back and join back into Big Pharma.
Yeah, yeah. What did it feel like at that time? I guess paint a picture for what it felt like to be in a company like Merck in that time period.
Well, exciting, of course, right? So there's a lot happening in that space. Drug development, our protocols, and I think our trials were a lot more simpler then. Immunotherapy hadn't really taken off yet. It was a lot of infectious disease. Like, as a matter of fact, I moved out when I started getting into the GCP side of things. I was assigned to the therapeutic area of infectious disease. So we were working heavily with what was happening with HIV, AIDS research, moving that all of those products forward. And then I started to just expand all the therapeutic areas as I was growing in my career and taking on more responsibility, that I was never one therapeutic area because I was managing quality across multiple. And so I think it was an exciting time to be at Merck. I was certainly there for our Vioxx days and got to see, how we had to navigate those waters at that point in time, which segued into other opportunities once we had to kind of become grounded from a lot of our site audits with budgetary limitations at that point in time. That opened the door for us to develop our process audits and for me to kind of dive into some of the system validation work that was being done. We had developed the first clinical trial system in-house, which essentially was adopted by Oracle to become the first CTMS. So things of that nature, being able to be involved in the evolution of how we were doing clinical research to see how it's being done today and how we're managing it and what we do from a quality perspective. Early on, very exciting. And I would say I've kind of sustained all that excitement. It's probably why I stay in this field. There's no end to the critical thinking that's needed in this field. And so that's what it takes for quality professionals, whether you're starting out or moving on. We need to have a lot of critical thinkers who can both be fixers and predictors.
Mm-hmm. So quality then, when was your first out and out quality leadership position?
So as supervisor of clinical packaging for the clinical research side of things, I was like the second person check, right? This was my first intro into and had to learn what the expectations were for good manufacturing practice. Up until that point, I had known everything there was to know about GLP and our, animal welfare requirements and certifications that were required to be able to do that work. But when I segued into clinical packaging, having to sign off on shipments in the warehouse and learning a lot about import and export, that kind of opened my eyes into the human research side of things, and me wanting to see where and segue into more of the human side of research. That was when I decided to take a master's program and got my QA/RA master's degree. And so through the education that I was taking at that time and doing that work was when I realized quality was probably going to be a good fit for me, because I wanted to make sure that we were doing things right. Always wanted to make sure we were doing it right when it was in the space of toxicology and anything that was being done with animals, but segueing that into how things were being done on the human side for participant safety.
Yeah. When you look at your traits as a human being and particularly growing up and that want to doing things right, what was it that made you realize that quality would be the career for you?
Well, I would say it's not a direct or linear type of answer. It starts with, yes,
Yeah.
everybody wants to do right. Everybody wants to do right. But then it turns into, well, we want to do this well. We want to do this well. And we also want to do it in the most efficient way, right? So I had, I think, a desire to make sure we were doing it right, but we were also doing it in the most efficient way possible so that we weren't causing delays with either shipments or what have you. So I think that was really the spark for me that moved me into quality, was making sure we're doing it right, but making sure we're doing it in a way that makes sense and that we can do it as efficiently as possible for the resources that we have at hand, the people we have, the systems that we're using, things of that nature. One of the first things I did, I am by no means am I a programmer, but one of the things I did in that role under GMP was to develop a system that would help us. We used to use these paper 9-page, they were called R9s. And there was 9 forms to how we were doing our shipments. And wrote an access system to help kind of operationalize that much more efficiently and move us away from the paper and being able to do that in a way that, again, was more beneficial to getting our drug supply out much quicker and helping with import and export documentation that's needed to get those supplies out the door.
And how was quality perceived back then in the role in the organization?
Well, originally in my career at Merck, I think we had, and everyone probably at that time, we were talking about like late 90s, early 2000s, there was a great appetite for quality and let's say a very, very, very low risk tolerance. And so I think we had a lot of duplicate checks. We also had a lot simpler studies then too. So there's also been an arc here that I've seen across my career where, yes, we had a lot of duplication. We did streamline things. This is where Lean Six Sigma was coming into play. We wanted to reduce defects, but we, again, wanted to do things efficiently. Sometimes we cut a little too much, right? And we had to kind of, we would see the rubber band snapping back and people going back into old habits or things that were either inefficiencies happening again or things that were creating gaps. And so I feel like we've been riding this wave since then of trying to get that right, are we doing things in the right way, keeping defects as low as possible and making sure that we're doing right by patients in terms of, getting drug out the door, making sure that we have, appropriate identity, strength, quality, and purity with our products, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah. So you spent this time at Merck, you felt like you were growing continuously, you were having different roles, you were learning different things. I suppose your remit was changing, which probably felt like you were going into different organizations or different opportunities rather than staying stagnant. Why was the decision to walk away? How did that all come about?
I get this question a lot, right? I actually resigned on the morning of my 20th anniversary, which was very serendipitous. Up until that point where I was invited to serve and represent Merck on Transcelerate, I really hadn't seen much outside of Merck. I'd been beyond my travel and what I was doing for Merck. I hadn't had much exposure to how operations were being run outside. So through Transcelerate, I got to see and support all of the industry standards that we've created and a lot of webinars that I'm on and helped my colleagues at Pfizer, Allergan, AstraZeneca. We wrote all the tools that you see out there. It's when I started to realize that if I wanted to see something different or see something from different set of walls, it was still going to be the same job. So I knew my next move had to be something different where I was going to learn an area that I hadn't really had exposure to. And a colleague of mine had indicated to me, this was at the time at that University of Penn had done an agreement with Novartis for Chimera under Carl June's development of the immunotherapy and the gene therapy programs, that there was a need for someone that could help build out in the Office of Clinical Research their quality systems, but they wanted someone that had that sponsor level experience. So this seemed like a great segue for me because I would have some exposure to the site side of things because part of the remit of that role was to oversee the research that was being done by investigators for other sponsor companies, as well as help and support those areas where Penn was functioning as a sponsor. And so I saw this as a great opportunity to figure out how would I build a quality system that supports both a sponsor and the site side of things. And it really was a great experience overall. So it was a good move. Most people would see that as going backwards. For me, it was going forwards to really get a little bit more exposure to how research could be done differently. And also
Yeah.
really, really helped me. I would say the biggest nugget that I took from that would have been learning in pharma, we know gold standard. We know how to do quality with everything and the kitchen sink. I had to learn how to do quality with so much less and how do we truly make it fit for purpose for an environment and manage quality in a way that makes sense for that smaller.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge move, particularly after 20 years in Big Pharma. What did people around you say? What did your colleagues think at the time? And did
Well,
you have any doubts?
my team at one point said you're probably going to have culture shock at some point. I will say about 6 months in, I think I was still thinking like a Merck. I was still thinking like a sponsor and realizing that, okay, we really do need to scale back some of our SOPs. Like how I was looking at SOPs was still with the approach of how Big Pharma would tackle how that particular SOP should be written or what we need to put in terms of what makes sense. And so I would sit down with my team. I had some team members that had been at Penn for a very long time and who were very good at helping me with this segue and this transition into learning that probably the most important thing at Penn was the relationships and who was connected to who and how the departments worked together to learn how to make a fit for purpose quality system. And through that, I learned, and I say to this day, even at conferences, that I ended up doing quality one cup of coffee at a time. I then kind of redirected my focus away from the paper and started focusing more and spending a lot of time pavement, feet to pavement throughout Philadelphia, because, Penn's huge, getting to those departments and getting to the department chairs and the heads and trying to get some feedback on what works for them, what works well, how they were set up in there, because they're all little research divisions. It was almost like trying to get 72 small companies to align on the same type of approach to quality. And so once I did that and started to put, my feet to pavement and getting in and sitting with a lot of those department chairs and how those different departments were run and build those relationships, was when we were able to build out a very fit for purpose risk management tool and quality system for Penn that is still in use today.
It's interesting you say that, because I speak to so many people, so many companies where they might have hired somebody who has spent so much time in big pharma, and they've gone into a startup environment and really struggled and
Yes.
and haven't necessarily made the role work. And that's because they're used to big budgets and proper systems and processes and structure, and not, which is very different to the startup world or academia. So you said there the relationships were the key. Is there anything else? Is that the main thing that you felt helped you work through that transition and that segue? Or are there other factors that you think you navigated really well to help you move in from that big pharma and forgetting the stuff that you learned there into this sort of completely different world?
I also think it was having an opportunity, I should say, to sit on the IRB, not routinely, but as a guest for certain protocols. I started to see a lot of the difference. And when I would think of what was quality from a fit for purpose perspective, I would see things like a study where even the IRB chair isn't seeing like the feasibility of a protocol that might have like 9 quality measures where a patient's not going to sit for 10 hours doing that. Like, you're having a lot of deviations in your protocol because although you want these study data points and you want to see this outcome for your science and what it means in terms of the endpoints you're trying to collect, it's not feasible to have a patient to sit for a visit for, over 8 hours. And so I think there was other things I was able to see and actually apply the learnings and the things that we've been doing, right? We've set up things and created standards through Transcelerate that are supposed to be applicable to all. I was still seeing opportunities where we could do quality better, and truly make it fit for purpose, as opposed to something that could be burdensome to smaller environments. So I think I was still trying to make sure that through my experience at Penn and what I was trying to do there, not just the relationships, but really build out a solid quality management program that was truly fit for purpose for the environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. And are there any habits or assumptions, for example, that people tend to draw from their time in big pharma that you or they might have to unlearn when you move into that startup environment?
I do think that we in big pharma get used to almost like that our nose to desk work that we're doing, right? So this could also be like the shift from individual to leader as well, not just big pharma to small pharma. I would also just say, like, the communications, and it's funny, as you progress in your career or as you get higher, you actually are learning to streamline and reduce the messaging to something that can be distilled down. What I would say another big thing that I learned at Penn was, in big pharma, we have teams of individuals who are packaging up the messaging and put it out there. Not necessarily communication teams, but we have people that can work with in our regulatory teams to determine and distill down what regulations mean. In academia, that's not as easy, and getting that messaging out is not as easy when you have 72 different departments. And so what's the right messaging for the right audience at the right time, I do think, is something else that folks who maybe in big pharma get very accustomed to how that's formatted and it's very standard. And you have to kind of shift that when you go to either an academic or a smaller environment, like a startup company. Certainly in the startup environment, you're going to be wearing many hats. So you have to tailor your communications to multiple audiences versus in large pharma talking to probably the same departments and groups that you're working with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So I think it comes again back to communications.
Yeah. What advice would you give somebody who's doing that right now and is maybe kind of in that period where they're in their first 3 to 6 months of a startup world, come from large mid to large size pharma, and they're trying to navigate all of these challenges?
Oh, take a breath is usually the first thing I say because I've had colleagues who've come in from Big Pharma when I was working in the startup and say, just remember to take a breath and to remember that every morning what you in your old life thought you knew exactly what your day was going to be like is not going to be like that here. You are likely to have a to-do list that you may not get to for 3 to 4 weeks because every day is something else that's coming down your way. Like you're wearing multiple hats. You have to be resilient and open to a pace of change and a pace of work that is very different than what you may be accustomed to. And to be gentle with yourself, to make sure that you are taking time for self-care. It's very easy when you move from large pharma into a startup to continue to keep burn the midnight oil way too much and way too often. And you don't want to
Yeah.
sacrifice time with family and friends. You do need to take that time to take care of yourself.
And what about on the flip side? If you are a hiring manager in a startup environment and you're trying to build a team of a quality team, for example, and you hire somebody or you interviewing people that have come from Big Pharma, what advice would you give to those companies or hiring managers to, I suppose, to prepare people for it, but also make sure they're making the right choices and making sure that they're looking out for the right criteria and the right skills in these individuals that they might have spent a long time in Big Pharma or different worlds, but they can cope with the complete contrast in environment.
This can depend on the role, but I would say for quality or regulatory, and one of the things I did when I joined Penn, I will say that this was one thing that I did right in that large transition was I did not come in with the intent to kind of steamroller through and throw a bunch of new procedures or invoke a lot of change initially. I did take the first 3 months to kind of sit back, listen to my team, listen to how things were working. I think that's why it hit me at 6 months because I gave myself the 3 months to kind of absorb and learn and understand the culture. And then I started doing the work, which put me right back into sponsor mode, which is why 6 months in I had to kind of regroup and come back to taking that step back and really appreciating and fully being open to the different culture that I was in. So if I'm hiring someone, I think what I would say to them, anyone coming from large pharma making this transition, any colleague of mine is don't think that walking in that door, you're going to be able to apply everything that you know from your prior life and that it's going to go over, right? You need to take that time, calculate enough time for yourself to learn the culture, to learn the people, to build those relationships, to build that trust that's needed for folks to then appreciate what you're bringing to the table and the changes or the things that you want to do to make things better for that organization.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dawn. That's really useful advice because there's a lot of people going through that right now, both on the hiring manager side and people that are looking for jobs. So I'm sure
And
there's
and
some
and ask questions.
stuff
Ask.
there.
Exactly. Ask a lot of questions. Ask people how they've been doing their job. Ask what they like about their work, what's working well, what isn't. Like really take the time to get to know them, to build those relationships and build that trust because it'll be much easier when you do have something that you want to instill as a change or change a policy or improve something once you have everyone's endorsement behind you.
Yeah. So looking ahead and then looking to now, so you run your own consultancy group, which a lot of people have started to do over the last 3 years that have been in permanent employment for some time. What does this chapter in your career give you that maybe your earlier chapter or earlier career didn't necessarily give you?
Well, I would say I'll compare it to my last chapter. I mean, working for a startup, again, you lose yourself a little bit in your role. And I love to be in my kitchen and I like to bake. And while I was with the startup, I don't think I didn't cook for like 3 years. So the consultancy allows me a little bit more time to kind of get back to some of the things that I've enjoyed and even some volunteer work in my local area because I can control my schedule better. That said, there are times that I do miss being fully in, I will say the fractional work is good. I question whether fractional is right for quality professionals because I do think we struggle fractionally to truly understand the culture and the risk appetite to be able to support things in a way that makes sense for the organization. So that is something I'm navigating right now. I understand some of the organizations that I support don't have the funding. Yet I want to be in it every day to be able to do things right for them and make sure that we're doing things efficiently. And, if it's a very small amount of hours that I'm giving, I know I'm only seeing very surface level and I may not be giving them exactly what they need in the moment. Hopefully that will change over time. But the consultancy has afforded me a little bit more breathing room to reassess things that I want to do and maybe what the next step will be for me.
And what are you looking forward to next? What's the next chapter? What are you excited about?
Well, my preference is to stay in the neuroscience space. The one big question I always get is why psychedelics? Why did I leave the day job at Penn? I did retain the faculty appointment. I still teach for Penn, but I left the day job to join, at the time, it was the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science. And there was a series of events that led me to that move. I've never had a psychedelic, never even knew that was an area of research that was underway until the recruiter connected me to Amy and the team. While I was at Merck, I also volunteered for the National Veterans Legal Services Program, working with our legal teams to review VA records and create advocacy briefings for combat related service compensation. And that was the first time I got a window into PTSD, which at the time didn't even have proper diagnosis codes for us to be including them in the briefings the way we needed to. Why were these soldiers having a hard time assimilating back into society, not just from their combat related injuries, but mainly from the mental health struggles that they were facing? So that was the first time I saw that and started to get pulled into what's happening from a mental health perspective. Because again, up until this point, I've been all immunotherapy, gene therapy, infectious disease, vaccines. Mental health was I was feeling drawn to the mental health field. Then sadly, I lost a nephew to a fentanyl overdose, my 19-year-old nephew, and saw PTSD affect my sister immensely and my family. And so when I was connected to MAPS for this role, it was speaking to me perfectly. This was something that seemed like a perfect segue. So that's how I ended up taking a role in psychedelics. And so I still feel strongly about this space. I feel extremely strongly about it now after having had the Lycos experience, us getting the CRL, even though we had a special protocol assessment with FDA. I was hired a little bit later after they had finished enrollment in the phase 3 program. So there was little I could do to change how that protocol was designed. However, we did a really great job in getting things cleaned up for inspections. We actually fared well on the inspections themselves. We did well with our inspectorates and a lot of learnings from that. And I think there's a lot in that field that we still need to clarify, especially with regard to the safety characterization and for labeling as it relates to subjective effects under a psychedelic. So if you ask me what I'm looking forward to, I'd like to stay in this space as much as possible and support companies that are, as you know, have priority vouchers in any way possible to help them with either their upcoming inspections, how they're managing their quality, and how we build that out and help in the space of mental health treatments. I do think this is an important space for society and globally that needs to be addressed. We have a lot of patients in need on that.
I think that's great, Dawn. I think you're clearly very passionate about that, and for good reason. And your career has been really interesting, and you're still sort of going through it. And I think a lot of people will feel some real sort of inspiration and support. I think from your journey, because it is a big challenge from going from Big Pharma in a long career into a completely different world, into startups and then into consulting, and also whilst staying passionate about a specific area of the science, I think is probably what anchors everything together for you. So I think it's it's great what you're doing, and wish you all the best. And thank you for sharing all that journey. It's really good to listen to it. A couple of, I suppose, just a couple of quick questions towards as we finish off, just to cap things off, Dawn. I suppose for you, if you were to go back to the start of your career, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I would tell myself to keep doing what I'm doing now. I follow that spark, similar to the story I just told you. They were, listen to your gut. There was something telling me this is the way I'm supposed to go. To leave like a large pharma and the career that I had to jump into something like psychedelics and the stigma associated with it, I knew that I was taking a huge risk in terms of like my reputation, et cetera. Knowing that my network of quality professionals were even asking me, how did you even like look towards that? And so I did follow my gut, and I truly have no regrets. And I would say to anyone starting out in their career, continue to follow your gut, follow that spark, what you feel ignited about, what you feel passionate about, because it will lead you down the path that you're intended to go. And even if it doesn't work out, as in the case of my last role, the company got sold off to private equity, which landed me in the space of creating my own LLC. And things have been going very well with that. So I do think that if you follow that spark and you continue to follow that passion, it will take you in the direction that you were intended to go. And it's certainly going to connect you to the network of people that you will likely build very good, strong relationships with, because you will be, when you're following that spark, you are representing yourself authentically, and people are drawn to authenticity, as I am. I'm always been drawn to authentic leaders, and I am drawn to authenticity. And so if you are living in the way that you feel you should be living and following that spark and that passion, you will be connected to people that feel the same. And that will take you very far.
Dawn, I think that's a really nice way to end the conversation. I think that's a very poignant journey that you've had, and a very inspirational one. So, look, thanks so much for sharing all of that. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I think a lot of people will take some good value from this conversation. So, appreciate your time, and I'm wishing you best of luck with everything that comes ahead of you.
Thank you, Hamish. It was a pleasure to be here.